is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are listening to Architecture Talk. Each episode we try and have a conversation with a contemporary thinker on topics of architecture and architectural thinking, and our desire and hope and expectation is that somehow through these conversations we will learn a lot more, not only about architecture but of the entire cosmos that goes into the making of architecture and architectural worldviews. Today I'm talking to my good old friend Gordon Walker, and we are discussing the new book that has come out just very recently, documenting his life and career. Gordon began as a craftsman in the Midwest and then moved to Seattle in the early 1960s and has been a very important part of the local architectural scene. One of the people who has played a key role in establishing the vocabulary of the Seattle way of design. I talked to him about his life and career, his expectations for the current and future, and also joining in the conversation is Kelly Rodriguez, who used to be the editor of Arcade magazine and helped put this book together of Gordon Walker's. The book's author is Grant Hildebrand. Perhaps we'll have a conversation with him at another time. Here we go. So congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
So tell me, Gordon, what got you into architecture? You're a passionate designer. Mm-hmm. This is what I get from the book and from the work that I've seen of yours.
I still am.
And you still are. And you're sort of this idea of the architect with his pencil and his drafting board, hunched over the drawing, trying to figure the puzzle of design out. Mm-hmm. When I think of that image of the architect, you're one of the people I think about. So what got you into this business of thinking architecture?
Well, at the end of World War II, my father moved his family from Iowa to North Idaho.
Okay.
He wanted to have a fishing resort.
Okay.
And they bought an old abandoned mining town.
Yeah.
Of like 60 buildings.
Yeah.
That was built in the 20s.
Yeah, I read about that, yes.
And it was building it had been abandoned for 22 years. And everything about it was reconstruct and rebuild. So I was, 10? I was in the third grade.
And he had you hammering away?
I had my hammer, and I followed my dad, and we would tear down one building to build another one, and I would clean boards and straighten nails, and I just got fascinated with woodworking. He was a good woodworker.
So you come from a sort of craft inspiration?
A craft inspiration. I'd say that's exactly
build
right.
inspiration?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the University of Idaho was very akin to that.
Yeah.
Because it was, they taught architecture, they still do, architecture, landscape architecture, interiors,
right.
Everything all in one studio.
Yeah.
And so it was a very hands-on, crafted kind of experience in education, so it all went together very well for me.
Right. That's fantastic. But at some point, Frank Lloyd Wright also became an inspiration for you, was that right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, it was 57.
Yeah.
And he died in 59, so he was kind of on the decline in the academic circles a little bit, but not at Idaho.
Yeah.
And
do you still hold by that? Is Wright still
I'm fascinated by Wright stuff, constantly. Yeah. I personally didn't care for most of his elderly work. I liked his young work.
Yeah, what?
I started with Oak Park.
Yeah.
In fact, I am going to be doing a little presentation to Historic Seattle this next week. Yeah. And in that, I'm showing the Unity Temple. Yeah. Because the Unity Temple influenced me. Finally, when I got to Seattle, my first real commission was a concrete block house on Queen Anne.
Concrete block, Unity Temple,
and
your
Unity
first
Temple,
house.
I thought, my God, I've got it.
What does Unity Temple have to do with the wood craftsmanship background?
Well, it didn't. I had enough wood craftsmanship.
Yeah.
I wanted to try something else.
Why?
Well, I just think it was an adventure in learning.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get anyone to build a bloody house, so I built it myself.
Right.
And that was a great adventure because no one in the crafts area, the people who build houses,
Yeah.
don't work with commercial materials.
Yeah.
And concrete block was a commercial material. You do
They
gas
look
station.
down on it.
Yeah, they
I'm
look
sure.
down on it.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, it could be very elegant if you put it together correctly.
No, wait, that doesn't compute from me. You come from a very strong craft.
But when you go through and start looking at it,
Yeah.
all the detailing is in wood.
Is it? Yeah.
All
That's
the
right.
ceilings are wood, all
Yeah.
the floors are wood, the doors are wood, the
Yeah.
windows are wood,
Yeah.
and I built all of those.
Yeah.
And so it had that, but it just had the case to hold it all
Yeah, yeah.
together.
So Unity Temple, mostly it's the materials that inspired you, or
The form,
form?
yeah, and very nice clear form of the box in the middle and the serving pieces on the end.
Right.
And I just really like the diagram of it.
Yeah, you were describing to me the Unity Temple, and the sort of and your house, this first project that you made, which was also in masonry blocks, which had amazing detailing. So it's the sort of combination of the blocks with the fine detailing. Is that what it is?
Correct. That's what made it was hard against soft.
Yeah.
All the warmth came out. It's a very warm house to be in.
Yeah.
It was never furnished
Yeah.
very well,
Yeah.
but that was another issue. But the house itself was kind of strong enough to stand up to almost anything you wanted to do with it.
Right.
It had major problems with my technical capability
Uh-huh.
of putting it together, so water didn't get through.
Well, all great architecture
Skylights.
leaks. We know that.
Well, for one reason or another. But I spent probably as much time back at that house trying to patch things and repair things and
Uh-huh.
keep it running.
Right.
But had fabulous owners and they loved it.
So you started in Idaho. What brought you to Seattle?
World's Fair.
Oh, really?
I graduated in '62,
Yeah.
and I ran into a young architect somewhere out of Portland. I thought it was Salem. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And I remember his name sort of. And he popped into Idaho with a little sports car and a handful of drawings in the back seat and wanted to have a slideshow. So he brought his slides in, and I was captivated by the guy. And I was captivated by his thinking because he said, you know what you guys want to do when you graduate from school? You want to adopt a small town. Go into a small town and sort of just get involved in the local community, the politics,
Uh-huh.
and help on the school board and help with things. And then what he had done, he was very good watercolor. He would render the street as it was and then render the street transposed. He was an urban planner and he was into urban planning and he did this and it was beautiful and it fascinated me.
And why Seattle?
Well, that's a long story, but it's continuation.
Yeah.
I was in the Army at the time and I had my training at Yakima.
Yeah.
Yakima Firing Center.
I see.
And I went there every summer for 6 years while I was in college,
Uh-huh.
and I thought it would be Yakima. And the more I went to the Army and did Yakima, Yakima started becoming, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And Seattle's World's Fair fascinated me,
Okay. What, do you
and
remember
Paul
what?
Kirk in particular.
Yeah, Paul Kirk.
And I just loved Paul Kirk's work. I was just fascinated with it. And so I tried and tried and tried, and I could not get a job with Paul Kirk.
Oh no.
No, I got a job with Ralph Decker.
Okay.
And Ralph Decker had just finished the old Seattle Public Library.
Ah.
And not a terribly good building, but it was classic Decker, and Decker was just a fine, upstanding sort of guy. And I was there for 9 months, and he gave me a raise of 25 cents an hour because I was becoming tolerant.
Uh-huh.
And it made me nervous. And
What did he mean by tolerant?
Well, I wasn't yelling about how shitty the work was. I'm terribly fond of his work, and I was very vocal about it.
All right.
And so I was kind of not a classy, easy guy to have in the office. And I thought if I spent 5 years studying architecture, and this is what architects do, I've made a mistake.
Yeah.
So I bought tools and went back to my trade.
I see.
And I had my insurance salesman was a family friend of my wife's.
Right.
and they had a house and they wanted a deck and a backyard done and a fence.
And
And
you were the
so I
man.
designed the backyard for them and built it. And then it was summer and my wife was teaching, and we decided to spend our 3 months doing our European tour
Okay.
of every cathedral in Europe in 3 months.
And that brought you back to architecture.
And that brought me back to architecture. In the meantime, I'd run into Ralph Anderson,
Mm-hmm.
and I really liked Ralph. And we eventually became lifelong friends. And I sent Ralph a postcard from Rome, and when I got to town, everybody had said, Ralph, he said, well, we've got a guy coming from Italy that's going to go to work for us. I didn't know about it. And so I came back and I visited Ralph, and the next day I went to work.
All right, all right. So you were at the World's Fair?
Oh, yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
remember it? What
Oh,
was
I
it like?
remember it.
Was it exciting?
No, it was just like a big fair.
Yeah,
The interesting part, the AI had a booth,
Uh-huh.
and
Under the Space Needle?
maybe that was where it was.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember that.
Okay.
But did you know Bud Shore, Barnett Shore?
No.
Bud Shore was he was older than I
Okay.
but he was in the same class here at the UW, in the same class as Jim Olson, my future partner.
Yeah.
And David Fukui and all of those
Yeah, yeah.
people. They were all together.
Yeah.
Bud was a dynamic man.
Okay.
He did a lot of Hollywood set design stuff before he got into architecture.
I see.
He was older, more mature.
Mm-hmm.
Bud was driving the AI, one of those little trailers around, hauling people around,
Uh-huh.
and was giving a spiel. And he gave the greatest spiel.
Spiel on what?
On the World's Fair, taking
Oh,
from this to
selling.
this to
Yeah,
this
yeah,
to this.
yeah.
And so
All
I
this
wrote,
cool modern architecture?
yeah, and Bud was, explaining all of this. Bud was full of himself. He's great. Bud
So
was
you
my-
had it, so you enjoyed that, or you thought
Oh,
it was
I
boring?
totally enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And
But did you like the Space Needle? And
well, I always thought the
uh,
Space Needle was a little over that. I didn't like it. I like the Space Needle better today.
what about
than I did.
Yamazaki's building?
I liked him. I liked those, the Space Gothic part.
Yeah, yeah.
I liked those.
Yeah.
The huts were, they were just huts.
Okay. All right.
I was never a real keen Yamasaki fan,
Mm,
but the Space Gothic stuff I thought was pretty cool.
right, right, right,
But
right.
the architecture of the fair really was. I mean, Key Arena
Yeah.
was probably the signature piece. I had a chance in 1980, 20 years after 1982,
Mhm.
20 years after, the city hired Grant Jones. You remember Grant Jones?
No.
Jones and Jones.
Oh, Jones and Jones. Yes. Okay.
He's
Yeah.
He's the husband.
Landscape. Yeah.
Landscape
yeah.
architect. Hired 3 of us
Mm-hmm.
to do a master plan for Seattle Center.
Uh-huh.
And I was very honored
Uh-huh.
to be asked as a 20-year-old practicing architect
Uh-huh.
to be hired for the city for a year to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through a multitude of things,
Mhm.
and the only thing that we really accomplished,
Mhm.
it was the first of the master plans.
Okay.
There's still master plans being done at the center, and there's never one going to fit.
Right.
And what we decided that really needed to be done was tear down all the exterior buildings,
Right.
because it was built in Paul Theory's mind
Right.
of being a Tivoli,
Right.
sort of a garden within a walled-in area.
Yeah.
And so they built tilt-up buildings all around the edge,
Yeah.
which shut the city out.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
that was just this row of nothing developed around it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was terrible,
Yeah.
a terrible intervention. And so we got those torn down.
Okay. You
And I
opened it
thought
up.
That was the main thing. And I got the ballet school moved
Yeah.
into exhibition hall.
Okay.
And they were my client. And
Okay.
I was doing that. So those were kind of the 2 things that we accomplished.
Okay.
Well, Paul Theory basically wanted to kill me. For
I'm
tearing
sure he
down
did.
his buildings on the
I'm
outside.
sure he
He was
did.
my age then, and I can remember him standing up there croaking, "You young fanatic, what are you doing? You're
Always the
ruining-"
young people creating trouble, you know. I mean,
I
it's
know,
like,
we were.
how do you think the architecture culture has changed, since you started in the 60s to now? Here in Seattle.
Well, I think the scale of the private practices of architecture has gone way up.
Yeah.
Done way up,
Yeah.
but it's all in really custom, fine stuff.
Mm.
I don't see the same results in most of the commercial work.
Mm-hmm.
The commercial work is B at best.
Yeah.
And
It's always been B though.
it's always been B.
Yeah.
And that's the best.
I'm talking about more the sort of the design culture, the people who do, interesting work like yourself or the new generation of people.
Well, I think a lot of them. I mean, my former partner and Tom Kundig are doing fabulous stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And so is Miller Hall, and those are the old ones now.
They are the old ones.
They're
now.
the old ones.
Yeah. What were the design values in the 60s and 70s, and how do you think those have changed, if at all?
I think it's a broader spectrum that's it's changed. I think the education in the last 30 or 40 years has been broader in terms of what people expect and people want, and I think more people are looking to have designed elements as part of their life than did in the 50s and the 60s. I think it was just a smaller group of people, and it's a larger group of people.
But it's the same. The ethic has remained.
Pretty much.
What would you describe as the Seattle design ethic?
Light, air, and views.
Light, air, and views.
Yeah, if you got good views and good light and air, you're halfway there. And I'm not necessarily with views. I think views are overvalued. I think you need outlook, and I think you need the light. And you need to know where the light is coming from, and you need to know how to bring it into a building.
What is a core design value for you as sort of the main thing that you're trying to solve with?
I think structure. I start with structure.
Structure.
I'm really disciplined on structure, and I believe it's really important that the bones of a building are readable, and that they are part of the aesthetic.
Right.
That means you don't have to expose everything, but there's a design logic that follows structure. I have the biggest problem I have working with young people right now, and particularly in Revit and other systems.
Yeah.
They will draw the thing and never have the structure in it.
Yeah.
They'll draw it without, because you don't have to have that necessarily. Or if they put it in, it's very faint. I start with a structure of how it's going to go together, and you don't come in and impose that on the very end.
Well, it's changed, hasn't it? I mean, earlier we had to very purposefully put the structure together, but now with computing, looks like they can sort of
they can
put the
solve
structure in later.
That's right.
And sort of make it work in crazy ways.
And they do, and to me it lacks a discipline that I think is fundamental. But that's old thinking. I know it is.
The 70s had a strong influence of sort of postmodernism, 70s and 80s. How did your practice respond to that?
We did a little. We got into that a little bit in the more decorative bit.
Yeah.
But it was decorative elements applied to a structural logic.
Yeah.
So I don't think any of our work particularly would be considered postmodern.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. I mean, it seems like you sort of ducked around it pretty good.
I remember we had a building called Hill Climb Court, which is in the market. And we
well-known building, yes.
We submitted it for an AIA Honor Award, a national. And Charles Gwathmey was on the jury.
Who designed our museum here?
Who designed your museum, the Henry.
Yeah.
Was on the jury.
Yeah.
And so he came out to look at that.
Yeah.
And I took him around to show him the building, and we had a drink afterwards, and I took him to the airport, and he was on his way to Portland because the Portland building was on the same jury.
Yeah.
And of course there was a bit of competitiveness between he and
Michael Graves.
Yeah. And he said he hated that building. He said there's no way that was going to be given an award.
Right.
Well, it got the award and we didn't. And so Susan Boyle, bless her heart, in our bathroom made a little plaque, and it was called the Charles Gwathmey Ratfuck Award. And it was above the toilet for years. But I got a kick out of that. But 2 years later, I was on a jury for a project that he was doing at
he meaning Charles Gwathmey or Mike
Gwathmey.
Graves? Yeah.
Gwathmey at UC Irvine.
Okay.
And I was asked to kind of do a preliminary critique on his building.
Yeah.
It was UC San Diego, I beg your pardon.
Okay.
And so it was really interesting, and he sat down when we started the jury, and he
Yeah.
says, "Don't I know you?" And I reminded me,
Yeah.
reminded me,
Yeah.
and he said, "Oh no, oh no." But I didn't play any games.
Yeah. No. So you practiced in partnership for periods of time, then you've been on your own, then you've been more recently part of a large practice with Mithun and
I was part of NBBJ for a while
yes,
too.
and NBBJ. So you've sort of shifted around quite a bit.
Well, I have always, when I find that I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, I try to figure out how to fix it,
Yeah,
and it's normally by jerking the rug out from under my feet and falling on the
that's a
floor.
good idea. Yeah,
But it happens, and you kind of gather yourself up and try it differently.
right.
And you don't build a continuity of a practice and build it up. You
Right.
build a life,
Yes.
and it's more of a life. And I've been much more interested in life than having a magnificent practice.
That's such a beautiful statement. It's more important to have a life, beautiful life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And you have built yourself a beautiful house on Orcas, I understand.
This is the sixth house I've built for myself,
Uh-huh.
and this one I actually had a builder. I was the contractor, but I had a builder
Okay.
because it's all steel
Yeah.
and it's all prefabbed in a way
Mm-hmm.
because it was all trucked onto the site.
Yeah.
And it was I needed professional help,
Yeah.
so I got a professional helper, and I did anything that's wood in the house. I did,
Yeah.
and the house is now 12 years old.
Right.
And this last weekend, almost everything have two guys there that are helping me
Yeah.
repair everything that I built because it's what's kind of leaking
Yeah.
or falling off
Yeah.
or not wearing well.
I see.
I see.
Okay, so what does this say about life?
It says if you can kind of tack it up and look at how it looks if you're building it,
Yeah.
you don't have to go back and put 3 more nails in it. If it's tacked up and it looks okay, move on to the next one.
Yeah.
So I was always kind of tacking to look at stuff,
Yeah.
moving on to the next one. I was going to come back and finish it.
Yeah.
I'm never really very good at finishing.
That's interesting. You ran into Murcutt in between in your life and career, yes? Also Glenn Murcutt,
Oh, yes.
Australian, yeah.
We were on a jury, a Sunset AIA jury
Okay,
in 60 or 86 maybe.
yeah.
And he was newly starting the career that he has now as a sole practitioner.
86? No, you started before that, did you?
Oh, he started. That's when I ran into him.
Yeah.
And he had been operating a bigger office.
Yeah.
But he just decided I'm a one-man office from
Yeah,
now
yeah.
on.
Okay,
And he had just started that, and he had done kind of his first steel house,
Yeah.
and it was famous. Everybody was seeing it, and Glenn was kind of a magnificent man that he is.
yes,
And I liked him right off the bat.
yeah,
And so we were in communication back and forth
right,
over the years.
yeah,
And I see him when he came here and
Yeah.
things like that.
right. How has he influenced your work?
I think the simplicity of my house on Orcas kind
Uh-huh.
of speaks to
It
the
has a
simplicity.
sort of little bit of a
It's a
Murcutt
little
feeling.
bit of a Murcutt feel in it, I would say.
Yeah. Sort
So
of a
we
really long plan
Mhm.
with sort of a rhythm and a bass.
He is a much more accomplished technical tailor than I am.
I see.
My details are a little more...
You don't fetishize details like he does.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Details just have to work.
He really gets into the detail
Right.
of things. Mine are more carpenter-esque,
Yeah.
and it's something I could build.
Hmm.
And if I can't build it, then I can't expect someone else to.
I see. That's a good logic. We run into trouble with some of the bigger buildings.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I have. I have. You're absolutely right.
Okay. So, what are the kinds of things you're still practicing, or what are you? What
yeah.
are you? How are you sort of
Well, I'm just
living this life that you talked about?
Well, I've been consulting with. I closed my office when I turned 65.
Yeah, good
and
idea.
I'll be 81 next week.
Yeah,
So that was 16 years ago, And since then, I have been working with Methuen as a consulting principal.
Right.
And we started off 16 years ago of, they wanted me 2/3 of the time.
Uh-huh.
And I was there more than 2/3 of the time.
Right.
But I'm by the pound. If they have work, I work.
Yeah.
If I don't have work, well, I've had all the work I wanted with them until last year.
Okay.
And last year, it's really fallen off.
Oh, really?
It's really fallen off. And I think a lot of it is my skill level has not kept up with technology.
Mm.
It's very, very poor. And I draw, and I draw, and I draw.
Yeah.
And it's kind of redundant if I sit down and do the drawing, and then somebody else has to take it and reproduce it in Revit or whatever.
Right.
And so it's trying to learn new ways to work with them.
Right.
And I haven't really picked up of how to do that quite yet. I have a few younger architects. I have not had but one client since I've been at Methuen that I brought, and it was the ballet school.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, I've been bringing clients, because I can't bring clients to I could bring clients to the firm and turn them over to the firm.
Right. Right.
But they would rather they handle the client, and
Right.
I understand that.
Right. Right. Well, but what else are you doing besides working?
What I am doing
Yeah.
is I have a house under construction,
Another house?
a big house.
Yeah. Your own or?
No, my house. I call my house a cabin. It's really not a house.
Okay.
But some folks saw my house, liked my cabin,
Yeah.
and wanted a house.
Yeah.
And it's nearly complete. It's steel.
Where in
Yeah.
Orcus? On Orcus?
It's on Orcus.
Yeah.
It's on waterfront. It's coming out well.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it.
Yeah.
I have an excellent contractor,
Okay.
a fantastic client,
Yeah.
and so it's going along swimmingly.
Right.
And I do. My wife is an interior designer,
Uh-huh.
and she's been keeping me busy with her little projects.
Oh, yeah.
I do her cabinets, and I do a little of this and a little of that. And,
Okay.
and I do have a couple of projects coming up with Methuen
Uh-huh.
after the 1st of February.
Okay.
I'm back in the swing.
Uh-huh.
No, I can't imagine not practicing or working.
Right.
I sit down at my desk and I will draw something every day.
Uh-huh.
So that's just the way I get my kicks.
So now when you look back at your career and your time here in Seattle,
Mm-hmm.
do you think there's such a thing as a Seattle style?
I've been down that route 100 times. Not particularly. It's VG fir, if anything.
What?
It's vertical grain fir.
Vertical grain fir.
Yeah, vertical grain fir.
The material.
The material.
That's it.
Well, that's kind of it. I think there was I think Kirk had a pretty good handle on a Seattle architecture, a Northwest architecture.
Uh-huh.
I think Ralph Anderson did to some degree.
Uh-huh.
I don't think it was as clear architecturally as Kirk's work was,
Uh-huh.
but I think it was damn good. And I think others of that era did work that I thought was Gene Zima did.
Sure.
But it's all kind of the same little bracket,
Yeah.
and I don't think people have built on that. I
Yeah.
mean, most of the big contemporary houses that are being done right now
Yeah.
could be in Seattle, they could be in Philadelphia, they could be.
You think it's just genetic?
It's genetic?
That's
So-
a loss.
I do think it's a loss.
Mm-hmm.
I do think my little cabin belongs here.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a Northwest house.
What makes it Northwest?
Probably because it has a lot of grace to it, I feel, but it's kind of clunky. It has some kind of heaviness about it that weights it down. It isn't kind of free and finessed together.
Mm.
It's kind of crafted together.
You think the Northwest is a bit rough and tumble?
Yeah, I do.
Yes, Kelly.
I have a comment.
Yes.
When I moved to Seattle in 1997, this might have taken place in 1998, but
Yeah.
there was a lecture at the Seattle Art Museum that I went to, and I was fresh out of architecture school, and I was kind of, came from San Francisco, and I thought I knew everything. Doug Kalba was speaking about a Northwest Pacific Northwest architecture, and I asked the question, "What is that?" And he described a rugged individualism,
Rugged individualism.
which has come up a number of times for me, and in thinking about the Northwest and also thinking about Gordon, and I feel like what you two were just speaking about is descriptive of that title.
Well, the individualism is a nice thing to add because that personalizes it. That's
You're
what
a rugged individual, Gordon.
rugged individual is.
Yeah, you're not.
Well, I've never followed the yellow brick road. I get off the road, and I think that's the rugged part. If I look back at my career, I would probably iron out a few spots.
Which ones?
I don't feel that I have grown a lot within design. I still see that it's it's the same little kit of parts, and I'm just still roughing around with that same kit of parts. I told Grant I think you were at that little presentation too, Kelly. I was showing the house that I'm doing on Orcas, and I said, it's the last shed roof house I'll ever do, because it was just getting to be an easy formula to kind of use the shed rather than a flat. I'm trying to not do flat roofs.
Yeah.
Would be delighted to try a new building type.
So what are you thinking? What's the new type that attracts you?
I would like to do concrete and wood.
Concrete. Poured concrete.
Poured concrete and wood.
Have you not poured concrete anywhere? Isn't that a big material for you? I thought.
Not as a major.
What about the
major element?
Pike Place building?
Well, it's a concrete frame. I would, I'm thinking I'm probably not going to be asked to ever do a building, but I might do another house. And if I did another house, it would be more concrete fins and walls and forms.
Concrete fins. Brise Soleil.
My thesis project was a poured concrete monolith.
Yeah.
And that's what I would kind of like to do. Would be really a big expressive thing out of concrete.
Poured concrete monolith, like a huge big concrete pour. Why? Why suddenly?
Well, it's just plastic. I was always
the
fascinated in school because of sculpture and being in an art school. The pottery room was right next to my drafting table, about 30 feet away. And I really liked pottery a lot, but I liked to build pottery forms. I didn't like necessarily throwing pottery as much as building slabs and forms and shapes and vessels. And I just thought it would be fun to do something a little more geometrically organic.
What do you think of Le Corbusier's work, his architecture?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
No, I love, Rocham. When I first saw that,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I really didn't like it.
Really?
I really didn't like it until I really started looking at it, and then of course when I went to see it, I was like blown away.
Really? Did you go to the monastery, La Tourette?
Yes.
That's a big concrete work.
Yes, and that's I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that because of the discipline in it.
Yeah. We don't do that much concrete work around here.
No, we don't. No, we
Why
don't.
not?
Well, for the main reason, it's you have to build a double concrete wall because you can't insulate it. Or you do the concrete on the outside and then insulate it, and then something else on the inside, and that's not the same.
Right.
So you have to build a double wall,
Yeah.
and it's terribly expensive.
I
So
see.
you don't do it.
Right.
And that's been the new thing with codes. Codes have really putting clothes on buildings are really tough
Right.
because you hide the structure.
Overall, I would describe your work as sort of a committed kind of a deep commitment to modernism.
I think that's fair. I can and have enjoyed doing traditional work, but bringing a modernist twist into it. And there's something about traditionalism when I lay out a plan, oftentimes I go right to formality in the way I organize a plan.
Formal organization.
Organization.
Yeah.
And I use that a lot. In fact, I used to be teased a lot about that. Well, here it is. It's another formal plan. But it's a formal plan, and then you give it a twist.
Right.
But if you don't do that, it's like sitting down and playing jazz without really knowing classical music formulation. I think if you know classical music, you can play jazz differently.
Jazz is to classical music as modern architecture is to traditional, or traditional is to modern?
Well, I think you need to know the traditional to be able to do the modern. And I use that as a big backdrop.
So you're saying formal plans is not modern?
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
That's very more bold.
I just use that. I use that as a guide for balance. A lot of times I'll go right into something. If I can't find another way to do it, I'll go right to something formal.
Yeah.
To organize it.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same way a ballet dancer has to have classical training in order to dance. Twyla Tharp, I'm reading one of her books right now. They have the classical training, but then they were able to do the most beautiful modern works, contemporary works, because once you have that foundation, you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to think about that. You can dance. Then you can let go. And I think with architecture, if you have an understanding of the foundation, then you can riff off of that.
Right. What do you think is coming down the road for us, Gordon? What do you think are the important issues looking ahead for architecture here or architecture in general?
I worry a lot about the reliability of manufactured materials, of getting out on a limb by trying something new and having it fail, which I've done, and siding primarily and windows. Tough.
Glue lamps,
CLT. Haven't had trouble with glue lamps. Now the certified timber construction that new is pretty cool looking stuff. I mean that's just fascinating to get your hands on to play with.
Yeah.
But you need special projects to be able to do it. You need special clients to do it. So they're still in the experimental stage. I suppose that's what I like best. I like clients one-offs who haven't built a dozen things. If they've built a dozen things, they know what not to do. And if you're trying to enjoy experimenting a little bit, they don't want to experiment.
Not developers.
Not developers.
You haven't said anything about sustainability. Is that what do you think?
That's actually why I went to work at Methuen, because I had no sustainability factor in my life. And Methuen is not terribly fond of my house because it's an exoskeleton.
Right.
And the steel is exposed to the outside. And I did have a kind of a way that I did insulate it, but still have it exposed. But there's still through webs that work. And I just decided that I really wanted to have it look that way, and I just didn't care. So there's an element of not caring. I think
rugged individualism.
That's the rugged individualism.
Rugged individualism doesn't worry too much about ever the niceties of insulation.
I really respect trying to care for those things, and the young architects really do. I mean, they say they do, and they really do passionately care about it. Because they just all the time, well, we can't do it that way. I said, well, it's just this one little piece. Can't we do that? Because it's going to look that. I know it's going to look better, but we can't do it. And so you have to figure out.
That's a loss, isn't it?
Pardon me?
That's a loss.
Yeah, it's a loss. I mean, it's a visual and aesthetic loss.
It is a visual and aesthetic loss. This whole sustainability business has really camouflaged up good architecture. Has it not?
It has camouflaged good architecture. Taking water off the roof and recycling water and energy, that type of thing, I'm totally for that. Any way you can do it.
Yeah. Give and take. I like Merkit's, one of his things he used to always say is, well, if it gets a little cold, put on a sweater.
Right.
Why does your building have to be ultra insulated?
I know. I keep my house at 64.
Yeah.
And it was not even bad during the freeze last week.
Well, the freeze froze the pipes in our. We have a property on Orcas.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, but we haven't built anything.
Oh,
Well, come visit.
Yes. No, I was in Orcas this weekend. We were there all the time.
Oh, I'll be damned.
Yeah. Well, we'll come next time.
Come next time. I'll show you my new house.
I'll be excited to do that.
Good.
Thanks for coming to my office and for this conversation,
Oh, this
Gordon.
is pretty interesting. You get me thinking.
And thanks also, Kelly, for being here.
yep, happy to be here.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Sammy Prouty. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions for new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us via our website or Instagram. And remember, if you ever want to read up on something we reference in a conversation, the website is complete with a timestamp outline for each episode so you can further stretch your thinking. Thanks again, and until next time, this has been Architecture Talk.